Good morning. My name is Andrew Schultz, and I'm the chair of the City of Albuquerque Board of Ethics and Campaign Practices. So I'm going to go ahead and call to order the meeting of the board for today. Our agenda has been posted already. So we have 5 items on our agenda. So I will ask for a motion from a member of the board to approve the agenda that has been posted.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move approval of the agenda. This is Michael Cadigan.
All right. Is there a second from a member of the board?
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman. Joshua
Okay.
Martinez.
All right. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the agenda, please indicate by raising your hand so that Miriam can see
Can I
it.
do a roll call vote?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry, Miriam. Go ahead.
Sorry.
I apologize.
Thank you. Member Cadigan,
Yes.
Member Caffrey,
Yes.
Member Martinez,
Yes.
Member Marks,
Yes.
Member Selvin,
Yes.
and Chair Schultz.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Motion is approved. Next, we have the minutes from our last meeting, which was October 29th, 2021. That has already been distributed to the members of the board, and they should have already had an opportunity to review those. So can I ask for a motion from a member of the board to approve the October 29 minutes?
This is Michael Cadigan. I move approval of the October 29th minutes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second. This is Christine Caffrey.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, Miriam, can you go ahead and call the vote, please?
Yes. Member Cadigan,
Yes.
Member Caffrey,
Yes.
Member Martinez,
Yes.
Member Marks,
Aye.
Member Selvin,
Yes.
Chair Schultz.
Yes. All right.
Thank you.
All right, motion passes. Before we go any further, I'm going to ask for all of the people who are on the screen, if you have not done so already, please put yourself on mute. It will greatly help things. Our first substantive item of business for today is the mandatory meeting of the independent auditor. So for this portion of the meeting, I will turn this over to the board's auditor.
Mr. Chairman and Board of Ethics members, thank you very much for letting me spend a little time with you today. This is our second mandatory audit. It's for the runoff election. I have received all of the data from every entity that needed to report. I sampled the expense transactions. I sampled the revenue transactions and compared bank balances with their filed campaign reports. The intent of the procedures was to determine if their statement that they were complying with the regulations was in fact true. After looking at all of the data, I found that everyone has complied and that I can certify that everyone signing off that they complied did in fact comply. So at this point, it's a fairly easy meeting. We can let everyone go who was here for the mandatory meeting. Miriam, do you need me to read the names, or can we just say that the entire slate of entities is cleared?
I don't think you need to read through their names. If you're here for the mandatory meeting portion, if you're a candidate for a committee for the mandatory meeting portion, you have been excused by the independent auditor, and you're welcome to leave the meeting at this point.
Mr. Chairman, are there any questions about my procedures, what we did or what I did, pardon me, or how they turned out?
Are there any questions from any member of the board for the auditor?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Porch, I think this is implied, but could you confirm for the record that all of the information requests that you reported to us last time that were outstanding have been complied with? and that all the issues you identified last time have been resolved.
Thank you for bringing that up. Two of them have, one of them is in the process. We had one entity that needed to close a bank account. They have. We had another entity that needed to separate their activities from one account into a separate account. They have not. I have communicated with them. They did give me data. They're in the process of closing that out and changing that structure. And then there was information I needed from Eddie Aragon. I did receive that finally. I did test his data and his data was fine. Other questions?
All
If
right.
there are no, sorry, sir.
No, I don't see any questions from members of the board. Let me just reiterate, if you are on the screen because you are attending the mandatory meeting of the independent auditor, you are now excused. And unless you just care to watch the remainder of our meeting, there is no reason for you to be here. Once again, on behalf of the board, Ted, let me just say thank you very much for how professional and how efficient you have made these meetings for us. And as always, we greatly appreciate your assistance.
Thank you, sir.
And I'll
I'll be
also
logging-
mention, sorry, I just want to mention for those of you leaving the meeting, the rest of the meeting is being streamed online at GovTV. So if you want to continue watching the meeting, you can watch it there.
Thank you. Miriam, am I excused or should I stay on?
You're definitely excused.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
All right, the next item of business for the board for today's meeting is the evidentiary hearing in Board of Ethics Complaint 09-2021. Before we go further, let me just double check. Is the complainant here? Okay, I see Mr. Baca, I do see you. Is counsel for the respondent, and that's Mr. Rimmer. Correct. And Mr. Rimmer, is your client here as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Before we go forward, let me make a few introductory remarks. I make these kinds of remarks before evidentiary hearings, but it is important, in particular with regard to this case. This is a matter, the complaint was filed and it was sent to the city clerk, and the city clerk has certified it and sent it to the board under Article 13 of the city charter and the 2021 regulations of the city clerk for the election code. This means that the city clerk has reviewed the complaint, found that it meets the criteria for the board to consider the allegations set forth in the complaint. From that point on, this procedure is governed by the rules of this board. In particular, Section 4, Article E, makes clear that the purpose for being here today is to provide the parties with an opportunity for a full and fair hearing. That does not, however, mean an unlimited amount of time for each side to present their case. I also want to reiterate that under Section 4, Article G, this board has been given very limited and constrained powers. We can impose fines of no more than $500 for each violation of the election code that the board finds. We can issue a public reprimand. We can do both. We cannot rule on the validity or the constitutionality of any portion of the city charter or of the election code. The rules governing the specific procedure for today's hearing are set out in Section 4E of the board's rules. That rule is very clear. At least 10 days before today's hearing, either or both parties are required to submit a written statement of all the issues to be addressed, a list of proposed witnesses to be called at today's hearing, a list of proposed exhibits to be introduced to today's hearing, and copies of all documentary evidence to be introduced to today's hearing. Neither party complied with most of this rule. And in particular, neither party provided a list of proposed witnesses. Neither party provided a list of exhibits to be introduced to today's hearing. And neither party provided copies of any documentary evidence to be introduced. The rule is very clear. The failure of the complainant to comply can result in the dismissal of the complaint. The failure of the respondent to comply may result in the admission of all of the alleged charges. Given the party's failure to comply with this portion of the rule, a portion of the rule, by the way, which the parties were reminded of by this court's order set out last month, there will be some changes to the manner in which the proceeding today will proceed. And in particular, the hearing today will last for no more than 60 minutes. I will keep the time, and the time will be strictly enforced. The time will be divided equally between the complainant and the respondent. During their allotted time, each side will be afforded an opportunity to make statements and argument in support of their respective positions. The complainant will go first, then the respondent. Any rebuttal is entirely within the discretion of the chair. Neither party will be permitted to present any testimony. Neither party will be permitted to present any documentary evidence. What the board has before it is the complainant's complaint, the respondent's answer, and the two briefs that were timely filed by each party. So before we proceed, let me ask for the complainant, are there any questions about how we will be proceeding?
Mr. Chair, no questions.
For the respondent, are there any questions about how we will be proceeding?
No questions on behalf of the respondent. Thank you.
All right. With that being said, the complainant has the floor and the time is
Mr.
started.
Chair, Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Marks. I am going to recuse myself from participating in the decision in this matter. I have a social relationship with the complainant, Mr. Baca. I wouldn't say we're close friends, but I feel it would, I'm not sure if it would interfere with my ability to render a judgment, but it has an abundance of caution. I propose to recuse myself unless you have a strong objection and the parties have a strong objection.
No, I appreciate your candor with that regard, Mr. Marks. Let me just ask a question of the city clerk. With Mr. Marks' recusal, my understanding is the board still has a quorum to proceed. Is that correct?
We do still have a quorum. Our attorney is nodding his head, so I think we're fine to move forward. Thank you all.
Okay. Mr. Marks, again, I appreciate your candor. You are welcome to remain on the screen or you are welcome to sign off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I intend to stay on through the meeting, but I will try and not participate in any of the discussions or the decision. And
all
for
right.
the reasons I stated, and to preserve the public's confidence in the decisions of this body.
All right. Again, thank you for that. Now, Mr. Barr, the floor is yours and the clock will start.
Mr. Chair, fellow council members, thank you. I appreciate your time. This is a pretty simple case. A person or group of persons calling themselves Stop the Stadium Prepared, Paid For, and authorize and distributed professionally produced yard signs, posters, flyers, and a large banner whose cost was well in excess of $250 to oppose a measure on the November 2, 2021 ballot. Unlike every other person or group who advocated for or against the candidate or measure on the November 2 ballot, this person or group of persons decided that they could play by a different set of rules than everyone else and not file as a Measure Finance Committee and follow all the laws and regulations required of a Measure Finance Committee, which are described in my brief and in my initial complaint. Stop the Stadium is not an organization, a nonprofit, or a business. The person identified with Stop the Stadium in their own materials, media statements, and media conferences is Rebecca Bex-Hampton, which is why I named her in the complaint and brief. Ms. Hampton has every right to voice her opinion. This is not the case about free speech. This hearing is really about two questions. Did Rebecca Hampton make statements opposing the stadium bond? And did Ms. Hampton spend $250 or more? In her brief, she agreed that she made statements opposing the stadium, and she has never denied the allegation that she spent over $250. As noted in my brief and complaint, I provided a timeline and examples where Ms. Hampton acted and spoke out against the ballot measure. Additionally, I did some basic review of costs and found an estimate of approximately $1,200. And none of these materials had the required disclosures on them. In order to protect the city of Albuquerque's charter, its election code, and the conduct of future city elections, Board of Ethics must find her in violation. Fortunately, the board ruled on a similar case with almost the same set of facts, Alex Curtis versus Shaver, BOE number 01-2015, and where the board found Mr. Shaver and Ms. Shaver qualified as a Measure Finance Committee and failed to comply with the requirements imposed on the Measure Finance Committee. Articles 13 of the city charter states in section 6C, it is recognized an affirmative duty rests on the officials of any Measured Finance Committee to be aware of the provisions of this election code, and nothing contained in section shall exempt a Measured Finance Committee from filing its statement of information. Ms. Vex additionally failed to file any complaints any information of its existence as required here in the earliest date possible. Ms. Hampton and Stop the Stadium simply did not want to abide by the city charter because they believe they could play by a different set of rules. There were 15 Measured Finance Committees established for this election to advocate for or against candidates and measures. Of those, I probably disagree with at least half of them politically, but they play by the same set of rules, so it doesn't, my personal opinion doesn't really matter. Several of these, like the ABQ Fire Pack, raised and spent very little money, less than $500, and yet they properly filed as an MFC. To allow Ms. Hampton and Stop the Stadium to do otherwise will forever change our system of campaigns that operate in a transparent manner for the benefit of the voters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Does the board have any questions for the complainant?
Yes, I do. So in your complaint, you attached several examples of messages that had a stop the stadium with a stop sign octagon. And what information do you have, if any, to show that all of these communications were paid for by the respondent?
So the octagon being obviously it's a design template, it's their brand, so to speak, which was found on all the materials, whether it was their social media, the yard signs, flyers sent out, and so forth. These were professionally produced. Just by seeing those, you can see they weren't hand drawn. They were produced and printed somewhere, and there was several dozens throughout the city of the yard signs. The large sign itself, the large banner, which can be seen on the newscast. Again, it's not a hand-drawn sign. It was something that was designed and produced and printed. So as they identified Stop the Stadium and Ms. Hampton has Stop the Stadium, someone had to pay for them. And hence she being the representative Stop the Stadium, I would assume paid for them. However, she failed to file the costs and expenses of this for the city rules.
Are there any further questions of the complainant by the board? All right, seeing none. Mr. Baca, thank you. And for the respondent.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. My name is Nick Rimmer. I'm appearing on behalf of respondent Rebecca Hampton. Mr. Schultz, if I could just ask you a question really briefly. I know we're being recorded. Is there a stenographer? I just want to pace myself.
No, there is not.
Okay, excellent. So I won't worry about talking too
Not
fast.
unless you brought your own.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. So my client, Rebecca Hampton, argues that the complaint filed by Mr. Baca should be dismissed on the basis that it fails to name a proper party, fails to present any evidence, and is a violation of our constitutionally protected rights enshrined in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Section 17, Article 2 of the New Mexico Constitution. Furthermore, the argument just presented by Mr. Baca contains no evidence whatsoever. It's wholly comprised of inadmissible, irrelevant hearsay and speculation, and should be disregarded in its entirety, as should his complaint. There's just simply no evidence that Mr. Baca has presented connecting Ms. Hampton to the materials mentioned. During the 2021 City of Albuquerque municipal election, Ms. Hampton individually, as a citizen of Albuquerque, opposed the $50 million stadium bond sought by New Mexico United Team ownership to finance a stadium to destroy Albuquerque's historic communities, including Morelos and South Broadway. On October 18th, 2021, exactly 2 weeks prior to the November 2nd general election, Mr. Baca filed a complaint alleging that, quote, stop the stadium and or the Party for Socialism and Liberation would be in violation of the following sections of the city charter, so on and so forth. Neither Stop the Stadium nor the Party of Socialism and Liberation were identified or named as parties to the complaint. Ms. Hampton is named in the complaint solely in her individual capacity as a U.S. citizen, exercising her right to political expression and free speech. Her exercise of free speech and free expression in the political process cannot be abridged, restricted, or punished by the City of Albuquerque Board of Ethics or any other such body. It's well established that in federal law and New Mexico law that any cause of action must name a proper party. This requirement is embodied in civil law in a couple places, particularly Rules 17 and 19 of the Rules of Civil Procedure. Require dismissal for failure to name a real party in interest. This general principle that a correct party has to be named extends even to discovery issues, particularly when you're seeking to force one party to answer discovery or questions on behalf of a completely entirely separate party. That applies here because Baca's complaint names only Ms. Hampton is improper and should be dismissed for failing to name a party. Mr. Baca has been placed on the notice of this deficiency in the answer filed and has therefore had an opportunity to seek amendment and, based on his failure to name a proper party, amend the complaint or present any evidence whatsoever that Ms. Baca is in fact connected to Stop the Stadium, it should be dismissed. The citation of Curtis v. Shaver et al. Is inapplicable and does not stand for the proposition that an individual person can be hauled before the ethics board for engaging in any political activities. The issue in Curtis v. Shaver et al. Is limited to a determination of whether there was substantial evidence to levy a sanction. And I will say that the Shavers in that case were in fact officers of Protest Albuquerque, the organization at issue, and relatively executive director and senior policy advisor. Ms. Hampton, by contrast, is an individual citizen with some, Mr. Baca alleges political connections, and other than that, she has no connection whatsoever to Stop the Stadium as an officer, as an executive director, senior policy advisor, anything of that nature. As an individual citizen, she engaged in her personal expressions of her beliefs. She's not a proper party. and his complaint should be dismissed with prejudice in its entirety. I do understand that this body does not consider constitutional arguments. I will say, the primary argument against any imposition of a fine by the Board of Ethics is that the use of the city charter and election code against Ms. Hampton in this manner, as it would be today if a fine is levied, would restrict, limit, and punish her for exercising her constitutional right to free speech and free expression. So, with that being said, and I think the lack of evidence for Mr. Baca being presented today, I think this is clearly a case requiring dismissal of the complaint with prejudice, filed in its entirety. So anyway, thank you very much for the time, and I'll yield the floor.
Are there any questions for counsel for the respondent by members of the board?
Sure, I have a question. I'm a little confused between if quote unquote stop the stadium is in any way an organization, as in does it have any corporate form? Because we can talk about stop the stadium as if it is a campaign, and the protest, the plaintiff kind of identifies it that way, but it could also simply be a command printed on a flyer, as in you recipient stop the stadium. So does it have any corporate form?
Ms. Caffrey, I know you ask a great question, and I always I'm hesitant to try and answer a question asked by a former contestant on Jeopardy, but I'll do my best. I think you're exploring exactly the issues brought up by the complaint. I'll say on the facts presented to the board at this time, I think your analysis is correct. I'm not here to say that Stop the Stadium is an organization. I think a search, I don't know what type of judicial notice this body can take, but a search of, corporate records through the New Mexico Secretary of State or the city, if they contain such records, would show that whether or not the Stop the Stadium is in fact a registered business or a legal entity of any kind. So did that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
Are there any further questions of counsel for the respondent by members of the board? All right, seeing none. Mr. Baca, I will give you the final word. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So by definition, a measure finance committee is any political committee or any person or combination of 2 or more persons acting jointly in voter approval or disapproval of 1 or more measures on the ballot. Ms. Hampton is listed on their materials, on the Stop the Stadium materials in my complaint as the point of contact for Stop the Stadium, at a minimum to be recruiting individuals to act together with Stop the Stadium. Hence, she meets the definition of a measured finance committee. Secondly, per the Board of Rules, Rule 4A to C on the Board of Ethics, complaints can only name 1 single respondent. Ms. Hampton was the person noted in as the point of contact for Stop the Stadium, hence I named her once again, fulfilling the requirements for a measured finance committee.
All right, thank you, Mr. Baca. Each side has now had the opportunity to present the board. Do we have a motion to go into closed session?
Mr. Chairman, this is Member Cadigan. I move the board go into closed session pursuant to NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1H3, in order to deliberate on the evidence received at the hearing held before the board in this case.
Is there a second to that motion?
I will second that motion.
Okay. So can the clerk's office call the roll on that motion, please?
Yes, Member Cadigan,
Yes.
Member Caffrey,
Yes.
Member Martinez.
Yes.
I'm going to skip Member Marks on this one, Member Selbin,
Yes.
and Chair Schultz.
Yes.
Okay,
All right,
I'm going to
the
move you all into a breakout room for your closed session. So just give me a minute.
We are back from closed session. For the record, the board is back in open session at 1:05 p.m. The board had a closed session pursuant to New Mexico statute section 10-15-1-H3 to deliberate on the evidence received at the hearing before the board in case number Board of Ethics 09-2021. No action was taken and no votes were made during that closed session. For the members of the board, is there a motion to present to the board for action?
Yes, I move that the board find in favor of the complainant, but that there be no imposition of any fine or reprimand upon the respondent.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, can I ask the clerk to call the roll, please?
Member Cadigan,
Yes.
Member Caffrey,
Yes.
Member Martinez,
Yes.
Member Selbin,
Yes.
and Chair Schultz.
Yes. So if the clerk will note that it was a unanimous decision. As is the practice of the board, there will be a decision, a written decision, and that will be forthcoming as quickly as we can. We have no further action items on our agenda for today. So may I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second, Chair.
Madam Clerk, if you will call the roll one more time.
Of course, Member Cadigan,
Yes.
Member Caffrey,
Yes.
Member Martinez,
Yes.
Member Marks,
Aye.
Member Selbin,
Yes.
Chair Schultz.
Yes. So the motion has been passed, so we are in adjournment. Thank you all very much. I appreciate the board's cooperation. We appreciate your attendance at today's meeting.